So good afternoon. My name is Tiffany Wilson, and I lead the Global Center for Medical Innovation. Frank, thanks for the shout out. I'll give you your check at lunch. So GCMI, we're an affiliate of Georgia Tech, and we launched 4 years ago to really serve as a nexus for medtech innovation and commercialization, and bringing together the ecosystem. And so we've seen really firsthand the importance of a multidisciplinary ecosystem to get new medical technology from bedside to bench to bedside. And so this topic is really interesting to me as we expand that ecosystem across Atlanta and the Southeast for biotech. And so in addition, I've been working on access to capital issues as part of my work at the National Advisory Council for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the Department of Commerce. And we've been facilitating a dialogue across the country on how we improve the success rates of life sciences and advanced technology startups as they move from grant-funded development to private equity investment. So I'm particularly interested in hearing from our outstanding investor panel today, and especially as Mike Cassidy mentioned earlier that 2/3 of the startups are drawing less than 1/3 of outside venture capital. So there's so much opportunity, I think, for us to do better. I'd like to kick off by having each one of our panelists introduce themselves and share a bit about their background and perspective, as well as, I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of what's exciting you and, or what's worrying you about the opportunity for biotech investment in Georgia. Rif, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, Rifat Pamukcu. I'm a gastroenterologist by training. I actually started my first biotech company when I was a GI fellow at the University of Chicago, and then went on to become faculty at the University of Cincinnati in gastroenterology and hepatology. While I was there, I got my merit review, my R01, and I raised $5 million, and all of that money sort of arrived in the same week. So I had to make a life decision on, do I stay in academia or do I jump ship and go to the dark side? Well, obviously the answer was I jumped ship and moved to the dark side, because raising that $5 million actually only took 6 months at that point in time. But that was also, the early 1990s, late 80s and early 1990s. And then that company became Cell Pathways. We took that company public. So we grew it to about 125 people, got acquired by OSI Pharmaceuticals in a bidding war with Lilly. And then subsequently, after that, I'm a glutton for punishment. I now I'm CEO of 2 startup biotechs. I'm on the board mentoring and funding an additional one, and then I got some other stuff that I do as well. I do have an affiliation with the Wallace H. Coulter Foundation, that I'm an outside advisor and have mentored somewhere between 150 to 200 clinical and engineer teams in trying to move their technologies forward. Do you have my thoughts, or should we go through the round of?
Yeah, give me your top of mind.
I think this is one of those situations where there's a sort of an old axiom in giving talks: tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And I think we're at the tell them what you told them phase at this point. And I think what you heard from the initial speaker and subsequent speakers are some critical issues. One that I see here is that you really need 2 components, and it's not just the bringing talent here, because you can kind of ship talent in on a few days basis. I do that with a company down in Miami right now. But what you really need is kind of what I like to refer to as adult supervision. If you want venture capital from the rest of the country to invest here, you need people who have done it before, but also people who have a business sense and who have the money who can monitor the development of the companies here. So you need homegrown venture capital that the venture capital in the Bay Area and Boston respect. So that they can say, if I'm going to invest here and not have that company move to the Bay Area, that I've got somebody on the ground who can monitor the investment and has the credibility to monitor the investment. And those two pieces, I think, Philadelphia is grappling with the same issue. It has slightly more venture capital, but a lot of the investors in Philadelphia, and I think may be the case in Atlanta, tend to be parochial in their investment. People like to invest in widgets and cash flow. People have a greater difficulty in investing in the dream, and that's what we sell in the biotech space at the early stage. Is we sell dreams, and we need to cultivate that sort of culture and those sorts of expertise in the area to support those dreams.
Rachel? Hi, I'm the Coutler Program Director, which is a fund that's inside of Emory and Georgia Tech, and we focus on medical technology investment. I guess that's why I say we should do everything, because we do look at everything as long as it has some patient impact. So we do look at the drugs, devices, therapeutics, everything, and we have to become experts very quickly in all those areas. This fund is in 15 different universities across the U.S. Emory Georgia Tech was actually the first, but we learned a lot over the years, and things have changed from the original time when Lee Heron, he's still here, started all this. I blame him for this. But what we do is we look at technologies inside these academic settings that have received all the basic research funding that they can get. They've actually come to a fruition in bringing something forward that's commercializable, and they're in that valley of death. So we put funds in to get them through that valley of death and out the door. So our money is literally to move you out of the university. So we do due diligence like a venture capital would do, because we want to deliver you to that follow-on funder afterwards. So we have to look at the end game. And one of the things I think that my 2 cents about what's going on in Atlanta, I've been here 2.5 years. Before then I was in Seattle, Washington, at the University of Washington. So when I talk to my teams when they first come in to get assessment of what they're doing and why it should be commercialized, I ask them to tear it apart and look at everything that's wrong with it. And I think that's what Georgia really needs to do, is really to tear it down and build it back up, because we have too many silos and too many people not working together. So if we can't beat ourselves up and really fill in those blanks and then put it back together to be strong, then we're probably not going to be able to accomplish what we need to. Our fund works with our technologies that we fund, and we have an outside oversight committee as well as internal committee. I bring in venture capital from California, Boston, Philly area on my committee, industry people from Minnesota and the DC area. J&J Innovations is on my committee, so I work with that group as well. And other entrepreneurs have been there and done that. So when we evaluate the technology, we're looking at it from the end game, from the M&A. Like, what does it need to have in the milestones, and what kind of resources do we need to put into this technology to support it all the way through? And that's an important piece, is the resources are much more valuable than the money that we put in, because if you don't supply the regulatory consultant, you don't supply the quality systems directions, then these technologies are not going to be as valuable as they can be. So the idea is that those things, in the past, those things couldn't be done or shouldn't be done in academia, and our program actually does do those in academia, and we discourage early rollout. While you can still work with GRA, Coulter, and other local non-diluted funds, as well as national funds, and really de-risk your product so it's a valuable product when you are truly ready. But it's hard to track the adult supervision, as Reef said, in Atlanta, because we don't have a mass of available talent in that area. So that's the problem I have, and I really need to talk more with Russ about, because right now we're in our second around since I've been here, and we have 2 drugs that are very promising, and both will be very huge hits for Georgia. And what we want to do is create that startup around those technologies and keep it here. But we don't ever really encourage or drive the faculty into creating a startup themselves, because they do what they do very well, and they chose that job. They didn't choose to go into industry. So we try to support them and build a team around each one of our projects with experts in the business sector. I have 6 people that work with me, and we pull in consultants for each project to work on all the pieces that they know best, the reimbursement, regulatory, quality systems, whatever it takes for that product to really get it to the end game. So I wanted to say our fund has been going on nationally for about 10 years now, and we put in nationally a little under 200 million. Our follow-on funding from that money is over $3 billion. We have 33% of the investments we've made that have exited with success, and success in our fund is any professional money. We like SBIRs, we like other foundations and free money, no doubt, we take that. But until you get a real high-level angel or VC investing in your startup, it's probably not real yet. On top of that, we have done over 20 licenses to real companies. We look at a company as 10 million more in revenues as a sustainable company that can really bring the product forward. So our bars are high for what we invest in, but the resources we put in it are real, and they make a huge difference. And I think that's the thing I'm most proud about, is that our statistics show that. I'll say one last thing, it's that we require that the technology have a clinician on board. I think that we underestimate the resources that the schools of medicine and the clinicians bring to the table. Companies want to talk to them. They're standing at the door waiting to talk to them. Everybody else is begging to get attention from these companies, and they're over here at Emory standing and waiting in line. So it's important to have those players at the table. Back to what the speaker said this morning, this is a team sport. You have to have everybody working together from all the different pieces from the beginning. That saves you time and money and moves you faster. Our products usually move out of the university in a year and a half, which is opposed to 5 to 10 years in the past. If you put the resources there, it'll happen, and it'll happen quick.
Well, I hate to be between you and lunch, so I'll keep it short. I've been in Atlanta now for 10 years. I grew up in New York City, actually spent 2 years in the United States Public Health Service after college as a statistician at the National Heart Institute. I went to business school at Stanford and have lived in the Silicon Valley area, in the Bay Area from the early 1970s until 2006, when my Alabama-born wife said we need to move back to the South. So I did, and that's Victoria in Victoria Capital Management. So she moved me here, and she has all my money. And I was fortunate to be in Silicon Valley in the 70s and 80s and 90s during really the birth of venture capital's, the venture capital industry's interest in life sciences up until really the early 70s. And then I credit my old friend Bob Swanson for this at Genentech, but the venture capital business was really focused on silicon technology, on semiconductor technology, and some software, and really Genentech was the one that fueled the venture capital interest, and we were in the same venture fund as Genentech company I ran called Collagen Corporation. We were in Kleiner Perkins Fund 1. And I ran that company for 19 years and retired in the late 90s. I took it public, wound up selling it to Allergan, and then started in the venture business where I've been since the late 90s and here in Atlanta for 10 years. I have a lot of thoughts about venture capital and what makes the Bay Area so special, but if you think about it, if you think about the 2 states that have been mentioned here this morning as icons of venture capital activity, which is Massachusetts and California. I mean, California has 13.3% income tax. It has no water. It has earthquakes. It has crappy schools. It has crappy highways. I mean, that is not a place you would start a company, right? And yet there are more startups south of Market Street than there are in 7 states down here. And that's not a criticism. That's just a statement of something that started over 50 years ago with David Packard and Bill Hewlett, and has since gone and has since evolved from there. So the ecosystem that exists there in terms of management's been stated here, in terms of lawyers, accountants, and money. But I would argue that money is not really the impediment to starting activities here in the state of Georgia. So I think one has to realize that the state of that venture capital, in fact, was started in Massachusetts by General Dorio, American Research and Development. So, I mean, these are 50, 60, 70-year-old traditions that we are starting now really 25 or 30 years ago. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that all the entrepreneur or any of us really wanted was to get stock at a penny and sell it for $10. And if the taxes are 6% or 13%, we don't care, because it's still a lot of money. So I think, what is the environment that gives you the best probability of success to make that happen? And right now, it has been those states. Right now, I think it's changing. I think Texas has done a good job. I think we are doing a much better job here. I think Mike alluded to some very interesting thoughts about leading with your strength. Certainly the vaccine development program here, the carbohydrate development program. But even on a later stage stuff, Atlanta is a phenomenal state for manufacturing. It's a great transportation hub. It has great highways. You have a port here soon. You have 2 plants, certainly that I know of, Covington for Bard and the Baxter plant. You have Marial. So I would begin thinking about leading with our strengths and perhaps looking at technologies that are a little more downstream than straight. And I realize this is a discussion of academics trying to spin out exciting biotech products, but there are other ways to make money, and that is to make the development process or the commercialization process more efficient. And I think Atlanta, with its modest cost of living, great climate, very good universities, great transportation system, could be an interesting place to become an expert in that kind of activity. So happy to comment some more.
So we have about 15 minutes of questions before lunch, and I really want to make this an opportunity to get your questions answered from the expert investors. So I've got a list of questions we can go over, but is there anything pressing in the audience right now?
Tiffany, I'd like to get your perspectives on something we haven't talked a whole lot about today, and that's state government incentives. And we talked about state-supported programs like GRA and our universities. But it used to be, we've been having these types of conversations for a long time, and we used to put a lot of emphasis on, well, we can't do it without state support. The governor's got to get behind it, and they've got to put millions of dollars behind it. And we've seen that model in other states work. The challenge is sustainability. So I think North Carolina is a good example of that, where there's a lot of state money and a lot of that's kind of gone away. Maybe that's coincidental, maybe it's not, and what Ken referred to as sort of a decline there. And we've seen it elsewhere. So I guess my question is twofold. One is, what value do you put on state support in order for us to grow the industry here? And can it be done in limited fashion with a one-shot, hey, we're going to focus here, or is it something that has to be developed over a sustainable, longer period of time that we know isn't going to go away? So
Yeah, and I think along those lines too, just from a, kind of expanding the policy discussion, what are things that can be done that you are seeing in other states that other investors are able to take advantage of that we could potentially implement in Georgia to really kind of bolster what Russ said?
Well, I can give you my perspective of the Pennsylvania experience. And I guess because Pennsylvania is a battleground state, we flip back and forth between governors of various persuasions, right? And so the beauty of that is that 2 different governors of 2 political persuasions decided they wanted to basically fund the same concept, which was take the tobacco settlement dollars and funnel it into biotech and high tech development. So they formed, one formed Ben Franklin Technology Partners, which is evergreen, and has been around for quite a number of years now. And the other one is BioAdvance, which was evergreen, and the one in Philadelphia, southeastern Pennsylvania, has managed to make enough money off of the pharmaceutical investments and device investments that it is now completely self-sustaining without significant state funds. And that's just a recent development. So they've now actually are able to expand beyond just investing in Pennsylvania, but they can do outside investments as well. So anyway, so that because that went on for quite a while, I think that created the momentum, particularly in the biotech space, where a lot of these things take a lot of drugs take a long time. It did help, and there's a difference. It did help that in the Philadelphia area, you've got AstraZeneca in Delaware, you've got Merck, you've got Shire, you've got Sanofi was there, Cephalon was there until it was acquired, Glaxo is there. So you've got a cluster of a talent pool that, as a startup company starts to grow, we can steal talent from the larger companies, essentially. And to address that question of what happens when a startup company dies, these people either go to other startup companies or they go back to the big pharmas. So you don't lose as much of your talent pool. You don't get the brain drain as much because of that. So there are some differences in that regard. But I think that longer term commitment really made that whole process sustainable. Now, there's one other thing, is that I think that politicians in general tend to look at FTEs and bricks and mortar. And, these startup companies are inherently unstable. And I say that they're inherently unstable because they grow, they get acquired, they move on, right? But what you really need, and I think somebody alluded to this about having to go to Pennsylvania to get work done, the real stable jobs in terms of making the pitch, I think, to the state, is all of those ancillary functions. The lawyers, the manufacturers, all of those are stable FTEs because they move from one company's projects to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. And if you can build that infrastructure, and you can, I think that's an issue of being able to sell that to a state legislature, because that is the truly sustainable component to it, supporting the ecosystem. Because there are a lot of FTEs in there, and many of those are high-paying jobs.
I think having those groups, GRA, is a great partner for me. We have to pipeline our early stage funding towards the best technologies and hoping to get those out the door. I think shotgunning funds are not good. But I've been impressed that the state has continued to invest, and yes, I guess we should prepare for the rainy day when it doesn't, when so many other states are not. So I think that we have to continue to do whatever we have to take to get that money committed every year, because it is making a difference, and it does make a difference.
I guess I come, and politically I'm a liberal Democrat, but I come from the school of, I don't think states pick winners, and I think there's actually plenty of venture capital around and plenty of angel money around for good ideas. There may be, and I think there is, probably a service that folks can provide, like you all, in connecting entrepreneurs with those funds. But there's actually a lot of money around looking for interesting things to do, especially in a low interest rate and low return environment as we have today in the public market. So I'm just not that supportive of state funding or state, personally. I think the state of Texas has actually done a pretty good job of that. They still have a lot of different funds, principally in cancer. But California has done none of that, and Massachusetts has done some. New York has done a lot, as Ken said, but in general, I'm just not a giant fan of that. The Small Business Administration had SBICs. We had 2 of them. I would say that the SBIC program, if you look at its track record as being better or jumpstarting companies that otherwise would not have been funded, I would say has not been compelling.
Other questions? So as innovators and kind of early stage companies are starting to make their way out of the lab, what are some of the things that they need to be thinking about that they're not thinking about to really position them for equity investment? What drives your decision?
Yeah, I mean, I think we go from the customer backward rather than from the rat forward, you know. So if you're a rat, you've generally been cured of most diseases these days, and you're a happy camper. Especially the ones who are not controls, right? But I think so. Trying to really, both from a presentation and a mindset perspective, think about it from the customer perspective. What is it? What's the population? What is the dosage form? What are the costs? I mean, I think you're seeing for the first time that the real barrier to entry for the acceptance of new products is actually not what you would have asked me 20 years ago. I would have said the Food and Drug Administration. Now it's payers. So if we begin starting with what is this thing going to cost, what size the population, to begin to have some kind of customer backwards, to at least match the expertise of the drug forward, is something that's probably missing in many of the early stage business plans that certainly I've seen.
I completely agree with everything you said. It's exactly the way we look at it when we're doing our due diligence on the technologies. We look at what's the M&A situation going to look like, and the M&A situation is going to look at whatever the company needs as far as value proposition for them to even be inviting you to the table. So what is it that you can sell to them that they can make money on is very, very important, and it's hard because it sometimes prevents lives from being saved because it really is all about the money, 100%. And that's what I was earlier alluding to. You tear it down and find out where your problems are. You fix those problems if you can. If you can't fix them, you kill it. You got to do that up front early, and you have to be realistic, and you have to listen to people. That's the most important thing.
I think we used to have an era of if you build it, they will come. Now it's you got to build it to spec. And you know, those endpoints are the spec. And I think right now, I mean, the payers are looking at two things. Does your technology make things more efficient, or does it cost less? And so it's outcome and costing less. And you got to have at least one of those in a very significant or substantial way, or better, you have both of them to make a compelling argument to get somebody to actually invest in it.
You know, one other comment I would make, and John, Richard, and I were having a chat about this earlier, is in drug development, and I think Genzyme has been a great pathfinder here, is that narrowing a population, narrowing your drug development to a population where it really works and where safety is decided upon very early, I think is something that is sometimes overlooked. I think people look for the largest market, they look for the broadest population. Not so much now, but certainly a while ago. And I think really focusing on the population for whom this drug or this vaccine or this biologic is exquisitely effective and very safe is something that people could pay more attention to.
If you look at where medicine is trending now, I mean, everybody's talking about precision medicine. So in a sense, what we're creating between biomarkers and the drugs that go with the biomarkers and the companion diagnostics that will go with the drugs is we're creating literally orphan populations. And there are companies now who are completely focused on orphan drugs because as a business model, I think that's where we're headed. So that, right to your point, that you now, you know, it's regulatory and the FDA is always lagging several years behind, so they have to get used to the idea that they're willing to give you an approval on the basis of a small safety data set. But since the payers are going to drive the issue of keeping the populations constrained in which the product is used, I think the FDA is going to eventually feel a little bit more comfortable saying you don't need 5,000 patients of safety. You need 500 because you're going to be in this narrow sliver. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that as we go forward.
One of the things that kind of comes to mind, one of the challenges in med tech investing now is that Series A investors are they want sales. So you need to get as far as you can with early, with the grant funding, with the seed angel investors. And people aren't getting acquired until much farther down the line. What do biotech investors or what do biotech startups need to be thinking about? What's the goal line there that they need to hit?
I mean, so biotech, at least I've lived through 4 of those cycles. By the way, the cycles are 14 years, I can tell you that. And they're all driven by technology. So if you think about the Genentech of recombinant technology, which is back in the 70s, and then monoclonal antibodies, the human genome, and now it's certainly immunology. But if you think about these cycles, I mean, there is a rush of company formation, generally out of academia, in the case of biotechnology. And I think owning a great IP position sets one up for a backstop in the case that either private funding or the public markets go dry. And we saw the public markets go dry really fast, right? So 2015, 2014, giant number of public, 181 companies went public, biotech companies. 20% of them preclinical. So that's a remarkable number, and it stopped January 1st. So a good IP estate, I think, becomes really important. And I think you're seeing, unlike the medical device world where acquisitions have been steady, but the acquirers have consolidated dramatically, right? If you have Medtronic and Covidien together, that's 2 guys out. If you have Guidant and Boston together, 2 guys out. So you have fewer buyers in the med tech world. The biopharma world still has plenty of buyers and I think an appetite for consolidation. So you see a lot of companies get purchased in biotech, which you do not see in med tech pre-revenue.
I think there's another phenomenon that has gone on is that the pharma is seeing that the early stage VCs have pretty much dried up. And so I think since they can borrow cash at a very low interest rate, they're looking at earlier acquisitions. Yeah. So we did an analysis for one of the companies. It was an oncology company, and we just did this last year. We did an analysis and looked at the acquisition points. We found, since 2011, there were 6 companies acquired at the end of phase 2, 16 at IND, 19 in preclinical by pharma, which is really an unusual, the mindset is usually pharma waits till the end of phase 2, just about to enter phase 3. That's shifting. And some of the term sheets I've seen have been looking like at IND are, $10 to $20 million up front, followed by high single-digit royalties for sales under $1 billion and low teens for sales over $1 billion. Now, that's kind of, that becomes the area where large angel groups are getting to play. And there are angel deals that have gone up to $10.5 to $13 million. So if you're going to develop a drug for, let's say, small molecule product development, $2 to $3 million, you're at an IND. Right? So on a $2 to $3 million investment, that's not a bad deal in terms of that term sheet for the larger company to take it over with some clawbacks in case, at some point in the future they decide that they're not going to pursue it for priority reasons rather than science. So the whole structure of that whole environment is seemingly changing. So you can invest smaller amounts of money and get an exit rather than have to wait for much longer periods of time and much larger amounts of money.
And you're also seeing in biotech these structured exits, which you used to see all the time, still do in medtech, where something down and very structured by milestones, which is...
Or I think that's the reason why we have to do a better job inside of the academic setting of putting the right resources in play so that we can take opportunity where currently there's plenty of it. And that's where we try to address those, but we need more people involved. There has to be those resources put in place and the value of those resources appreciated inside of academia, which is one of the things that we
More
often,
community.
often come up against is why do we need to do that? Well, because you have opportunity much faster if you're doing the right thing early.